morning, everyone, and welcome to another video. In this video, I will be discussing the universal dualities or polar opposite forces which we have come to symbolize in one particular notion, such as the yin and yang. And in the yin and yang symbol, you see that for a half light and for a half darkness, within said half light, you would then see there is a darkness within it, and within said darkness, you would then see there is a light within it. Let's dive into the analysis. Based on the emotional intelligent stimulus, imagine now if I was to separate these aspects from a emotional and logical standpoint of how the mind essentially works and formulates itself within what we call the human body. In the understanding of polar opposite forces, you could say that everything has a polar opposite duality, resulting in one experience. Which means now if I have a emotional intelligence response, I will also gain a slightly logical perspective of that intelligent response. And if I have a intelligent or logical response to something, I will gain a emotional attachment to said logical response, the means of finding balance. The problem now is we are no longer in a harmonic balance as people, which means we have lost a way of connecting with a portion of ourselves. And in the portion of ourselves we are no longer connecting with, we find where we then see the problem and the essential root of the basis of the current state of the day today. I'm stuttering. In the balancing of the rooting, where you slow down the thought process and you synchronize with your thought process, you could essentially say that from the word became flesh, a notion inviting conversation, connection, reflection, because in conversating you need to have a standpoint and the opposing force rebutting the essential topic, which in itself creates an evolution of said topic based on the critical thinking generated around the said topic. Now, if one particular individual all of a sudden controls the entire conversation, you could say they hold the state of the alpha at that particular point, which unless if a rebuttal is made which strikes then anxiety in the explanation of the exploration of self, if the individual cannot strike anxiety in its explanation of the self back to the self in a more advanced, more striking way, you could say this sort of sword play is in essence where we see the battle fought around where the alpha regarding the savior sits. And in the savior is the notion that anyone can be the savior, which begs the question, why are you still not essentially finding your balance? Because the moment you find your balance as a person, you can actively see a trajectory change in the exponential potential of the trajectory your life could go the moment you simply speak your mind. The question of the alpha remains, who gets to speak their mind all the time? Because nobody does anymore. And then you might see the rise of things like celebrities, politicians, on and on and on until we disappear as an alpha, where you can control the world without ever having to even spend a dime in order to do so. What is this process? It sounds like a sick and twisted experiment in order to expand human consciousness, which in our understanding of human consciousness, the more we can generate or understand a topic, such as an external field, it becomes a science of sorts where we can actively create a better understanding of something beyond ourselves in order to not fear it, resulting in ourselves and obtaining a sense of being alpha on Earth, which is why humans are technically right now the most intelligent or most divine being upon the Earth, which results back to the animal gods, which were of a higher conscious state at that particular point, but that was of a previous video's topic. In regards to the initial topic, if I may retrace my train of thought now, in the exploration to discover what the root of our fear is, if it was not animals, and if it was not humans, then we would fear God. And if we feared God, we would essentially see the break of the initial alpha, which is the center of self, where you take your strength as a person, and every single person can be the internal alpha of their internal universe. In the battle of the alpha, if the idea of whoever strikes fear the most is the idea of the alpha, well then we would get nowhere in society. We'd be constantly killing each other off at that particular point, which has been basically what we have been doing this entire time. And in the notion that in order to essentially crown he who wrestles with God, to crown Israel, we would essentially have to create a people which were not of a particular one specific place, but were travelers. And in the Holy Land is where they found their kingdom. Now, based on this particular statement, what would you ultimately argue is the crown of Israel? He who wrestles with the Alpha in a, you could say, constant debate. Because unless if you can alter the perspective at which you change the evolution, then you can see that based on this analysis, if you cannot alter or change the current knowledge of said universe, then you are not at the alpha either. But if the alpha itself is he who wrestles with God, then even the alpha has a higher power above himself or herself, according to which hierarchy each masculine or feminine then essentially pulls into their hierarchy of beings. And in the hierarchy of beings, we see where the formulation of how creation formulates itself, according to where the fear sits. And if a fear sits in one particular being in its kingdom, such as a human kingdom, then if the fear of said being, all other life forms fear this being, said being may expand in its population, such as reproduce. If another animal, such as, say, a lion, has a fear, as a result, the human creates or feels a fear to the lion, then the lion is above the human. And if the lion was above the human, there would be more lions on the world. And the idea of the Alpha, whoever controls the throne of the divine upon the plane of the earth, gets to be not only the guardian, but the ruler of the earth as a conscious life form, which means you're technically above the rest. And in that notion, if you are above the rest, who is above you? You could argue a person that strikes fear in you, which even all people have one particular trigger point, whether they have one last particular feeling or one last particular fear, preventing them from essentially making the next ascension, which is the fear of death. And once we break down the fear of death, it is your moment of judgment, which is what is the moment we fear about death. The judgment portion itself, it's not the act of dying we fear. It's the act of the punishment or the reward, which is the unknown, which is the decision ultimately a higher power makes, which even that higher power serves under another higher power. And this grows exponentially until you get to the center of the experience, which is here and now. And here and now, you must feel within yourself, you must accept the fear you feel within yourself. If you can't get over that fear, your life doesn't continue moving forward. And in this psychotherapy, you must now realize that this is the moment you can literally say, I don't want to be that anymore. And you can experience your rebirth, whether it be physical, spiritual, or mental, or a metaphysical process, a rebirth of your soul, where you kind of just stand back up like, holy shit, I feel kind of good now. I feel like I just gained $1 million under my chest, because you feel a new power within yourself. And in this power is where you see the evolution of man. The moment we arise to a new higher state of resonance, we now are above physical matter. And in this state, you are the able, which the previous self, the crippling jealousy, Cain, was killing you from your ability to continue going forward. And in the rebirth, we see that Abel was killed by Cain. Because the crippling self is what kills you in the end. And once you experience the rebirth, well, you could say the lineage of Abel then steps forth, which in the Bible, we only speak of the lineage of Cain going forward, because it is meant to be of a separate kingdom. The lineage of Cain continues down the physical kingdom, where the lineage of Abel has now entered a separate experience. And in this sense, you are now reborn of the Word, that which became thy flesh. And in this rebirth, start living your life. Make better decisions up until the last moment. Because you could essentially say, it's all an experience, buddy. And in the human experience of things, you must also understand the higher perspective of things. And if you can't get there, not everybody makes it, as the path to heaven is not an easy road. It's not the good that make it to heaven, it's the most evolved that make it to heaven. Which in the evolution of man, do you take on a good-hearted nature? The second division that is an essential key behind the idea of the first notion behind heaven, which begins a new division, which exponentially grows in the patterns of your life. Where do you see you can make the change? And that ultimately starts within yourself.